So the issue before the court was, what's the burden of proof on an employer when an employer is trying to establish in court that an employee is exempt under the Fair Labor Standards Act from overtime and minimum wage? Many, not all, but several of the U.S. courts of appeal have ruled that the burden of proof is higher than the normal burden of proof in a legal proceeding. Just to give you a quick legal lesson, if you will, the normal standard of proof in a legal case is something we call preponderance of the evidence, which in a jury instruction usually says that a certain proposition, a fact, is more true than not true. Okay? That's the preponderance of the evidence. And when an employee sues saying that they were misclassified, the preponderance of the evidence is a standard they have to show that they were misclassified. Some of the circuit courts of appeal had held that when the employer puts on its case to defend the classification, the employer has to prove the exemption by clear and convincing evidence, which is greater than a preponderance of the evidence, and thus a higher burden of proof to win the case or to establish the exemption. Well, the Supreme Court ruled in a case called EMD a couple of months ago that those courts of appeal were wrong, that the standard of proof for an employer to establish an exemption from the overtime and minimum wage provisions of the Fair Labor Standards Act is preponderance of the evidence. This clarified for employer that they don't have a higher burden than normal in a legal proceeding to defend themselves and try to establish an exemption from the minimum wage and overtime provisions of the Fair Labor Standards Act.